Hello, everyone.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this conversation hosted in collaboration by the Black Opera Alliance and the Asian Opera Alliance, and all who unapologetically seek equity and justice in the field of opera and in the broader ecosystem of Western classical music. My name is Garrett McQueen. I'm a bassoonist, I'm a digital and broadcast media producer, a writer, public speaker, presenter, activist, but foremost, at least as it pertains to this space, I'm a leadership council member with the Black Opera Alliance and facilitator of today's conversation. I'm honored to be here. Jamie, how about you tell the folks a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. My name is Jamie Alilaw. My pronouns are she and her. And I come to opera by way of being a soprano, a lyric soprano, because,
There
we
are
need
many
more
of
of
you.
those.
Yep.
And I am also a producer, a curator, a creative. I've dipping my toes into some other things because I don't have enough to do. And I'm also a leadership coach with a focus in anti-racism work. And for the sake of this conversation, I am also a member of the Leadership Council for the Black Opera Alliance.
Yes, thank you. So the goal for today is to lay out for you and for the members of our respective constituencies some of the events that have been taking place in the industry, specifically as it relates to Long Beach Opera, and to highlight it as an example of some of the broader industry's issues. We're going to get you up to speed on everything that's happened in case you aren't aware of what's been going on. You'll hear from former Long Beach Opera collaborators who will lay out their grievances with the organization. And as I mentioned, we'll offer some context for this situation as something that isn't exclusive to Long Beach Opera, but something that's industry wide and something that change makers like Jamie and myself are here to address and have a responsibility to address. So Jamie, you know how I am with my quotes. So to offer
Give it to us, please. Give it to
to
us.
offer a framework for some of these things we'll be covering today, I want to read a short passage that was recently published by academic broadcaster and author of What White People Can Do Next and Don't Touch My Hair. I love the title of that book, Emma DeBerry. So she writes here: much of the energy that erupted after the murder of George Floyd seems to have been hijacked by a brand of anti-racism over-concerned with representation and interpersonal relationships. Not only is representation not an instant remedy for racism, it remains a stark example of how representation politics can actually distract from truly emancipatory politics. And she went on to write, what I am certain of is that, in the words of Cedric Johnson, any movement that does not address economic inequality serves primarily as theater and not strategy. I wanted to start there, Jamie, and maybe you can offer a few words before we dive in for folks who may not stay for the whole time or hear this and will log off. Representation is not the end of the conversation. Representation is not the end of the conversation. Any thoughts there?
It is a yes, I have lots of thoughts, but I'll keep it brief.
Yeah,
Um, it is a necessary aspect of the conversation, but when it stops there, it becomes tokenization, which is dangerous and insulting because it denies the voice and the contributions of those who are representing, and it makes them figureheads to be used as shields to give the illusion of change without actually implementing it. And so
absolutely.
and so BOA, we are here. It's in our mission that we are here for systemic change and racial equity in the industry. And the change part is what this conversation is about today. What does it take and where we go from here? So
Absolutely.
I want to welcome you all to drop any questions or comments in the chat. I'll be on the back end manning the questions, and Garrett is going to so strategically facilitate the conversation. And then at the end, I'll be back and we'll jump into some of these questions.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jamie. So, with that, we'll see you in an hour. And I'd like to introduce here to the stage Yuki, who joins us from the Asian Opera Alliance alongside Alexander. Yuki, we'll start with you. How about you introduce yourself and tell the folks a little bit about who you are and why you're here today?
Yeah, my name is Yuki Izumihara, pronounced she, her. I'm a scenic projection and production design. I work in the field of opera, theater, and film. What I do is create sort of establish visual identity or language to talk about the show, whether it's an old show or a new show, touching on making it for the audience that lives now.
Hmm.
So yeah, and then in terms of relationship with Long Beach Opera, I was actually brought in to sort of help them with that visual identity part. So it was trying to have a visual language that goes along with um, what their company identity, what they're for, and such. So yeah, that is me.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And Alex, how about you introduce yourself? Tell the folks a little bit about you, your relationship, former relationship with Long Beach Opera, and why you're here today.
Hey, Garrett. Yeah, my name is Alexander Gedeon. I am a stage director. I've been working primarily in opera for the last 5 years. I have a background as a musician and a stage actor. And in early fall 2020, I started working with Long Beach Opera in a role that was called the Minister of Culture, which is a title I created that was at this intersection of being an artist in residence that was creating my own work. But I was also tasked with helping the company diversify its artists, particularly in the realm of stage directors and designers. And so I did that and was associate directed a couple of shows there. Last year, assistant directed the original production of Central Park 5 there. I also was the stage director for Stimmung, which was supposed to be the first show of the season, and was the creative producer for the new production of Central Park 5, which is going to open in June.
Yes. Well, thank you to the both of you very much for being here and offering yourselves today. And last but certainly not at all least, I'd like to invite Dr. Darrell Akon to the conversation as well. Derrell, thank you for being here. How about you tell the folks a little bit about you and why you're here today?
Absolutely. Thank you, Garrett. Hi, Yuki and Alexander. I'm Darrell Akon. I am a Blacktivist, activist, performer. I'm also an administrator. I use he, him pronouns. I'm currently in New York City, the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, about to premiere a film that I created and produced with Heartbeat Opera this weekend. So I'm very excited about that. In terms of Long Beach Opera, I came into Long Beach Opera about 4 years ago as the engagement and education manager. And then I moved pretty quickly into a director of engagement and equity position. And then the last position I held before resigning was two positions: chief impact officer, tasked with being the go-to person to determine the social impact of the programming, how our mission execution would land with the public, how we could better fortify around being more authentic to our values as they relate to the EDI space, EDI being equity, diversity, and inclusion, and also access and representation, as you and Jamie have already spoken so beautifully to. And I was also the associate artistic director, which a title that is more straightforward. But as we will find out in this conversation, not for all, but that's to come.
And
Happy
for
to
the
be here.
sake of complete transparency, how about you talk a little bit about your relationship with the Black Opera Alliance?
Oh, right, exactly. Well, the Black Opera Alliance is my heart. I'm one of the co-founders. I am the president of the board, but I think it's important to clarify that I am no longer a member of the Leadership Council. I am not involved in the day-to-day activities of the Black Opera Alliance, nor do I dictate what the Black Opera Alliance does. And I think it's a really beautiful balance being someone who was in that space of the founding of the organization and now, benefiting really from the advocacy that this organization is able to offer to Black artists and BIPOC artists, I would say more generally, as it has really emerged as one of the leaders in the industry around these topics.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much. So, Alexander, I want to start with you because a lot of the press and the media surrounding what happened at Long Beach Opera directly names you and sort of circles you. For folks who may not know exactly what has been going on, how about you bring folks up to speed?
Yeah, so the first show of the season was Stimmung, which is by Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. It is a production that I collaborated with Yuki on as production designer. And it's a project that we had been cooking for about 15 months leading up to it being in the season this year, and my first project as a stage director for the company. And I think it's tricky to talk about Stimmung without the understanding the broader context of what happened at the company, which is essentially that in December, Derrell, myself, and the education and engagement coordinator, Elijah Senius, all resigned collectively to speak out and call attention to a culture of misogyny, of racial tokenization of leadership, and a lack of unclear values, which we felt was enabling the first two things to happen the way that it was happening. And then no clear HR structure, which, or ability for the leadership we were dealing with to process uncomfortable feedback. Because as our work continued, there was more and more uncomfortable feedback that we had, and found that door for us to have actual input was slowly but surely closing. And as we approached December and our grievances became more pressing and more severely ethical in nature, we were left no other recourse but then to start addressing these problems directly to leadership. Did not get the kind of traction that we expected. And then this gesture of us resigning collectively was actually a resignation letter that we read at a board meeting on December 11th, 2021, with this hope of sort of shocking and galvanizing the larger structure to be like, hey, there's a fire happening here, and the artists of color that are remaining in this organization are going to leave because it's no longer sustainable, and wanting to finish our projects and give them the opportunity to respond as seriously and we wanted to finish the projects to and allow them the space to also rectify, engage with us, and help navigate, because we believed in the projects that we were doing there and felt that they were emblematic of the values that were missing at the company. And as we did this, initially we never they started an investigation in early January. They said that they were going to begin a mediation process. That's actually was later. But January came around, production started. And so now we're back in the rehearsal room. And lo and behold, it was 6 weeks before the leadership team, with whom we were working, were actually acknowledged the letter. And we were sort of left in confusion as does the company still support this? Are they doing this? They could have just also fired us, which seemed a distinct possibility. And instead we were in this sort of limbo in between space. And by the end of January, without any, we'd had like both of our respective productions, the one I was stage directing and the one that Derrell was creative producing, we had COVID outbreaks in both of these productions. Never heard anything from leadership. Never, our casts never heard anything. We were really, a company that was already pretty scrappy. We were now sort of handling these things on our own, and as the second show in the production hadn't heard a single drop about production support or anything. At the end of January, we said, okay, is this going to be supported? Because if it's not, we have no other choice but to go public with this conversation, because right now we're being set up to fail, which would be the worst case scenario, is that now we've created these projects where we've brought in people of color en masse into all of these different roles that you never see them in the opera space. And yet we are being hamstrung and unable to actually follow through with them. And as we approached, after receiving that message from us, they said, we definitely want to support you. We're completely there for, we are 100% in support of your artistry. Also, all of the things that you've brought up are very serious, and we're going to have a mediator who's going to guide us in conversations through the remainder of the season to best address how to address these issues in the company. The issue, though, is at the same time, there hadn't been any communication, and all of the staff and leadership meetings, through which I would wager about at least 60 to 70% of the communication work that would happen for the shows, were canceled. So if you imagine being at a lower budget opera company, trying to direct or creative produce a project that's already fairly scrappy and already trying to rebuild its infrastructure, now suddenly you have no staff meetings, you have no leadership meetings, and this was the sort of brain of keeping this cohesion between what the company is doing and what the productions are doing. So we started to be sort of siloed off in this. And as I was working on Stimmung, and I heads up the cast that this is what's going on in this company at the moment. And as we got, but that we were also dealing with this lack of communication. So I told the cast, this is a situation that might need to go public. The resignation letter might need to go public at a certain point. And then just shy of 2 weeks before we opened, some members of our team expressed that they did not want that resignation letter to go public until after the show had closed. At the same time, there were mounting concerns by members of the team that they could start to feel this lack of support. They could feel that their marketing was definitely an afterthought, questions of access that were going to impact how this was experienced, how all of the work was going to be experienced. These things were continuing to mount in the background, and not having, if you've been in a situation in an institution where you're trying to implement very specific values in your workspace that are not really endemic of the values of the company, there hits a point where it doesn't matter how much you're trying to do to make your space a safe space, it's failing. And and I think the company, having not acknowledged the situation that was happening, compounded this, because a lot of people felt trapped. It's like, I've told them this is what's happening, but we're all supposed to be pretending like it's not happening. I think actually, as weird as it was to have the cancellation of the show be the moment that LBO announced that these resignations had happened, I think it's actually the best opportunity for something healthy to happen going forward for people that are coming into this space, because at least then there's some sort of accountability or humility to saying, like, okay, we have these issues, and we can navigate them as we go forward. With Stimmung, we didn't have that, and it was just a pressure cooker situation. And as we got towards this, we had this conversation. They didn't want it to go public. They felt like, I had also unconsciously was perpetuating the same thing that I was fighting against. And so, which to me actually reinforced that I should, step back from this, because if this is a situation that's beyond my control and I can't support or help people or control, and as painful as it is, I had to take 100% responsibility for a situation which I didn't feel 100% supported.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
and
that was the unfolding of the production.
And Yuki, I'm going to come back around to you to speak to that lack of support that was being felt and the social isolation that was being used against people of color. But Derrell, quickly, I just for a point of clarification, when the group resignation letter was read in December, what at that point was the plan for the productions that hadn't yet been staged?
Yeah, at that point, the plan was to continue on with the productions. We even said specifically in the letter that our goal is to actually figure out a way to create some kind of a channel with the company so that all of these artists and these topics, these provocations that we had brought into production for the company, we would see them through. And I'm very happy to answer that question, Garrett, because one thing that is missing from the public conversations, especially those conversations that are being framed by Long Beach Opera, is that there is a 3-month period from the moment we submitted that resignation letter and when we finally decided that the situation actually, in fact, is untenable. And Alexander needs to step back. I ended up sending a letter with the person who's the director of the film I'm creative producing. We sent a letter jointly with withdrawing support of Long Beach Opera producing our show. This was after, having not heard from them for months, of having not been supported by them, and then receiving a message basically saying, we're not going to produce a live version of your film, but we still want the film, and we'll decide what we want to do with it. And I was like, so once again, in a situation where there was already this refrain of BIPOC folks, BIPOC experiences, BIPOC skill sets, BIPOC perspectives being used in support of systems that ultimately perpetuated oppression of marginalized people. They kind of just wanted to take those resources and decide amongst themselves what they want to do with them. And that's really something that we continue to see, even with the Central Park 5 now. This is where, by my estimation, some of the most egregious activity is happening, and that because that's the big moneymaker. This is a show, keep in mind, I've been with this company for years, and I know that this is the show that they're really planning to have the dollars come in. And so some of the tactics they're resorting to are really troubling, including more tokenization of trying to use Black people in particular, other BIPOC folks, and pit them against other folks, and to undermine, to disparage the words of BIPOC people as a way to keep that production intact by any means necessary. The phrase "any means necessary" in this context is just very troubling, and I think far removed from what Malcolm X and Black nationalists meant when they meant this really active fight towards justice. So yes, the short answer to your question is we were perfectly prepared to continue production. In fact, excited to produce these shows within an environment that we felt was actively working to correct itself. But we had these two criteria. One being we had to see verifiable evidence that the company was actually working to get better, to progress, to rectify the situations. And two, that the artists, the collaborators that we brought on to these projects were kept safe at every stop. And unfortunately, on both of those counts, the company ended up being deficient.
So Yuki, Darrell has already hinted at some of the things that were happening in the recourse aspect of this situation, the gaslighting. You've spoken to social isolation. I wonder if you can speak more to the culture that you were experiencing in the midst of this situation.
So the whole problem actually has been that there was no feedback system that was actually like systematically set in place at the company. So meaning say that when there's a problem, there wasn't a actual pathway to actually bring these issue up, except for example, Derrell being the de facto person. However, for example, before I actually say all of this, one thing that I do want to point out is that for me, this has been like now, I guess 9 months, but by the time resignation happened, it has been actually a 6 month process for me to actually actively trying to be engaged in this particular equity conversation with the company. This was not the reason why even my name is actually was not I was not the three people who resigned, but I am still here today. Is that uh, along with the reason why these people have spoken up was that not only they were part of that harm or being part of people who were being harmed, but also they spoke up for 10 people who actually already had brought concerns in along while they were like these employees were there. And then actually for my instance, I have spoken up about concerns continuously along those 6 months, before December 6 months. But there was sort of a big email exchange that actually happened between the CEO and me, even like regarding to me actually speaking up about when you bring people in, you have to actually support them financially, like because um, uh, financial harassment is like decapitating people financially is a harassment.
Right.
Right. And then it happens actually um, uh, s- it, when it happens, BIPOC people are more tend to get more harmed. BIPOC people get harmed more easily. Um, so that was something that I had been speaking up against the company. And even after this resignation letter happened, I was actually a production designer for Darrell's shows and actually Alexander's show. Um, and uh, the problem is, the problem was there was one number one, as Alexander was saying, there was no conversation. By the time Shtimon rehearsal started, there was actually no HR structure in place yet. So what has happened was that Alexander and then an associate director have created this, and then actually along with the help of Shtimon cast, they were being a part of actually trying to create a safe space that company was lacking. So with their suggestions and everything as well, they have created anonymous feedback portal. As we were talking with him and associate director, Alexander being a male, oh, maybe we need actually a board member, like sort of female board member who is sort of contact information, just in case if something happens to the cast, they can actually reach out to them, that kind of thing. But we were coming up that on our own, and it the fact that we are not having a conversation with the company kind of made it feel like what we're doing is cultish.
Mm.
And and then also the fact that transparency has to work both ways. when we are being transparent to the cast and then like trying to explain, because again, we cannot really 100% shield them for anything that's happening or that will happen. Like the best thing we can do is equip people with what's going on, so that when certain things happen, the last thing we want is that them thinking that it's their fault or it's something that they did and such, because that affects, I think, as an artist, like that affects their artistry. So with that being said, though, them not talking about the situation, which actually this is a conversation we did have in the mediated conversation. One of the actionable items was that when the leadership team comes in, they actually explain what is happening from their perspective, and then which is we didn't want people to feel like they're caught in the middle of the divorce. That was not the point of any of this. But this whole tactic of essentially social isolation, are you on my side or on yours? Are you on their side? That kind of a thing. For example, when I actually spoken up, the CEO have actually copied artistic director who's my friend, who like I have a 5 years of working relationship with him. He will CC him on, but she will not CC Derrell on, for example, when my concern was actually connected directly to the EDI issues. And then the whole point seemed actually pretty clear to me that them actually like the CEO was trying to be more so of, okay, like this is our side of it. Like if you're not happy with your side, I was even offered to opt out from the show before all of this happened. So like, and then also this whole that social isolation as a tactic, it makes people feeling stuck in between. It's almost like knowing what happened to, like, imagine being a cast and then like knowing what happened to certain people, but pretending that they're fine and having to have a great working relationship with these people. Like rather than us all talking about the situation and then feel like, okay, this did happen, it was bad, but we are all trying to work towards and come go to the other side of this, like come out and then become a great place. So that was something that was essentially what we didn't have in the process, which was, I think, what led to us being like now having this conversation here.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Derrell, I want to read a little bit from the summary that was taken from the internal investigation. It says here, the summary claims that Long Beach Opera, quote, did not have a misogynistic or racist culture and found no evidence of any racial or gender discrimination. Additionally, the investigator found no evidence of tokenization, no evidence of mistreatment of BIPOC staff, contractors, and no evidence that female staff were treated differently or unfairly because of gender. When we have that statement coupled with the levels of representation that are present at Long Beach Opera, what's your response? From the outside, it looks like you're the problem.
I mean, from the inside, it would look that way too. If you were to be in some of the conversations I'm sure they're having. I for me, even if I were not involved in this situation, to hear that about an opera company in America in 2021, 2022 is problematic in and of itself. And then when you compound that fact with, this fact that all the Black people left at one time. And one thing I want to clarify that helps this conversation as well is for me, I had determined prior to December that I was leaving the company. I did not find myself to be empowered there, and I did not see a pathway toward convincing these folks that I actually can do the job I was hired to do, and was in fact the most skilled person to execute that expertise. But the thing that made me want to speak more publicly, to speak with a fuller throat, as it were, is the fact that when I announced, as I was making my exit, which was going to be quiet, and I was prepared to do the normal, here you go, Jennifer Rivera, who's the CEO of Long Beach Opera. I think just as we've been named in the press, their name should be out there as well. James Darrell, the artistic director, and I think there's more to be said about how specific people have been treated. So I want to just clarify names here. And I was prepared to go that route. However, when I began to speak to colleagues, both those who were still employees at the company and those who had left recently, a number of complaints had come in. And these were mostly coming from women, about half of whom were women of color. And, and I remember one employee, I told her that I was leaving, and she broke down into tears and talked about feeling terrorized at the company, feeling like, Alexander and I were the only sources of protection. Similar to that, folks who had left the company were just as passionate about this space that we were potentially creating for them to get some sort of justice. One thing we say in the letter is that these women are not leaving this company because they find better jobs, which is what was being said to the board. And I know, because part of my job was to be at board meetings. But in fact, they were leaving because they did not feel empowered there. They did not feel like they had the same access to opportunity, to advancement as their male colleagues. And so, one thing I find very telling about the way, and just to be clear for everyone, this report that we're reading from is a report that the board of Long Beach Opera has written, summarizing a 21 or 22 page report by the actual investigator. And so when I hear what the report did not find, all I can think is, you're just sort of creating your own narrative, because I can easily imagine that the report doesn't say there's no misogyny, there's no racial tokenism. I mean, I don't think lawyers even have the framework, the parameters to test for tokenism. That's not a legal concept, but rather because it was not in the foundings, in the findings, they come to this conclusion for the public, for the framing, to say, oh, it's not there. And I just think it's unfortunate because, along the way, we have been trying over and over and over to come back to the table, to be a part of the discussions that were happening. There was even an email, and I have some receipts, and so if we get to them, we'll go there. But there's even an email that we sent to the executive committee of the board saying, we are prepared to go through with these shows, but we need to be in conversation with the executive and artistic leadership of this company to ensure the artists and ourselves as marginalized people are kept safe. And the board literally said, we don't think that conversation is necessary. And so we encourage you to just keep moving forward with the productions, as we've asked you to do, basically. And so that's when we determined that we need to take some of this public. So, that's my response, just in narrative form to the report. But I think there are also many specific receipts, as I said, that speak to the opposite of that. I think any place where you have marginalized people moving in a collective fashion and you're not discerning some systemic issue with the structure you've helped cultivate, then you're not trying to actually be a part of the solution. In fact, you're really just trying to control the optics.
And to the point of these specifics that go unnamed, Derrell, I think you said something very important. You spoke to the fact that many of these structures don't have the means of measuring things like tokenism. How are you measuring those things? How are those things being determined? And not only the tokenism, but other things that were cited, like microaggressions and those things.
Yeah, I mean, well, I will say that I am someone who in this space am a consultant. I am an EDI practitioner. And so part of my job is to create metrics around how how societal points of societal oppression, marginalization become compounded in usually white supremacist structures, of which most opera organizations are a part. And so I, as someone at this company, as someone who has been hired throughout the industry to do this kind of work, had been trying to operationalize my own findings, my own metrics. And if I, as a leader of the company, am a Black man who is being sort of publicized as a part of this grand vision of progressiveness that Long Beach Opera is offering to the industry, and yet on the inside, I can feel myself little by little being stripped of the power that I do have, being stripped of my ability to offer perspective, and there are very specific instances of this. I'll give a quick one. There is this Indigenous Peoples Day post, and keep in mind, I'm the chief impact officer of the organization, and this is a very nuanced post that we needed, and I was not consulted until the 11th hour. And then I said, okay, what I'm seeing, I think this is problematic because it speaks to work that the company is doing in the Indigenous community that we're not actually doing. I think you can make a commitment to do these things, but we cannot pretend like we're doing them. And secondly, this idea of the settler colonial legacy, which the report spoke to, the statement spoke to, that's not my legacy. That's not Alexander's legacy. It's not, this other Black person in the organization's legacy either. That's a white legacy. And so it essentially, by releasing that on behalf of the company, you're erasing our experiences as Black people in this organization, trying to help you become more authentically inclusive. And my comments were met first with a text message by the artistic director saying, absolutely, you're completely right. I'm with you. That's why our team is so powerful. And then publicly on the email thread with these people who were not only LBO employees, but also outside contractors saying, essentially, Derrell, well, that's not what we're asking of you. We're not asking you to veto what we're posting. We're going to post this no matter what. We're asking you to help us frame it in a way that's going to be less problematic, and so at that point I was like, well, what can I do? And of course they end up posting their version, and then an Indigenous person, a Native person, actually commented and said, well, I'm a Native person, I used to work there, and I tried to get us to do this kind of work for the Native community, and the company didn't want that. And what does LBO do? They delete this comment of the Indigenous person, and so these are the kinds of things that are happening. So more directly to your point, I know that tokenism happens. For me, the simplest definition of tokenism is when diversity of any sort, representation of any sort, is being used as currency without the actual power, the authority, the space, the agency for that person or that group of persons to actually execute what you're purporting they can execute. So in my case, this is one example of many of me not having the ability to actually execute my function as the chief impact officer of the organization. And in Alexander's case, as the minister of culture, part of his purview would include diversification, but also ensuring the safety of these artists in this space that is historically oppressive towards marginalized people. And when he's being stripped of the agency to do that by not having HR mechanisms, by being excluded from leadership conversations, by not having the agency actually to do anything when people bring very real concerns about how their experiences of marginalization have been compounded, he then too is being tokenized, and it just goes on and on and on and on. Right.
So Alexander, I'm hearing in my mind right now, someone watching saying to themselves, oh, this isn't actually important. This is just woke culture, run amok, all of those things. With that narrative that truly exists in mind, in retrospect, why were you hired into that sort of position as Minister of Culture, understanding now what you didn't understand then?
Wow. That's really been a long, slow process of disillusionment, I have to say. I think Yuki and I particularly, we came in fall of 2020, or I guess Yuki came in shortly thereafter. And the idea of being in a company that had Jenny Rivera, Darrell Akon, shortly thereafter, James Dara, Chris Roundtree, to me sounded awesome. it sounded like a dream team. I was like, oh, wow. Okay, we're going to have the sort of, superpowers of all of these people combined. And, the incredible aesthetic sensibility of James Darrell, the like, the clarity of EDI principle coming from Derrell, and and slowly but surely it realized, oh, that's not actually what this is. And I think, to her credit, Yuki was hip to this before I could understand, which was when I was first made the offer to, in conversations with Jenny about what the job would be in late August, September 2020. The opener of the conversation was, this is, coming off of the summer of 2020. And she talked about, wow, this has just been such a time, and COVID and Black Lives Matter. And I'm looking at the season for 2021, and it's just like, wow, there's just so few people of color in any of these spaces. And I don't know how that oversight happened. And, and so I was sort of being told that I was a de facto solution to this problem, and also being asked to engineer solutions to the problem as well. Now, this was exciting to me because of the curatorial part of being an opera director, is to sort of say, okay, well, this person could do this, and it could be a collaboration of this, and seeing that lack of diversity in experimental classical music, experimental opera in this form that I love, and frequently finding myself the only person of color in New York City in a room of 300 people, or Los Angeles in a room of 250 people. I was super excited about it, about this prospect, and even maybe thinking, like, in my head, like, you'll try to tokenize me, that's fine, but I'm going to do awesome work, and I'm going to fucking, break through it. Excuse my language. Yuki, put her hand on my shoulder and said, wait a second, you need to define the terms of what the work is and why you are being asked to do this diversity work. And I think, to me, it was just that opportunity of just like, yes, I'll get my friends, I'll get people that I know that can like make change and to help define principle, but I think that's when the moment of caution first struck me. And as it went on over time, I did feel like I had this window, or this room, or this channel to say my piece and articulate what my principles were. And then found myself, before I knew it, being discussed in leadership conversations, which was actually not a part of what the contract was. In the PR that initially came out, it was like, LBO hires new leadership. And I was like, leadership? That's interesting. And then I'm being told by both the artistic director and the executive director that we're not going to do things. Yes, we are bringing in a white male artistic director, but we're not going to do things the normal way. As a matter of fact, we're going to be making these decisions as a nucleus. And before we know it, there's a leadership council. And so this leadership thing is happening. And by the time we had one or two of these conversations that had ended badly because we were giving unvarnished feedback, I actually called Jenny and I said, hey, do you think that maybe we should not call this leadership? Because that does not seem what is happening here. And that was in May or June of 2021, where I started to feel like that's not what this is. And we're publicly promoting that that's what this is. And within the next couple of months, again, I had to, in a leadership meeting, I had to blow the whistle, because we're canceling these leadership meetings because they're getting uncomfortable. And we're still saying that it's a leadership structure. And all of that is met with, well, guess what? Derrell is now the associate artistic director. And I'm like, I love Derrell. Okay, they're gonna give him real power. This is great, right? And then seeing firsthand that I would think that if you're going to have Darrell Akon on board, that means you're like going to make equity like a really front and center part of whatever artistic structural conversations that were happening. And that was not what was happening at all. And so that cognitive dissonance that was going on made me start to take a step back, be like, okay, this is the dream is not actually where we are.
Before we get into the question and answer portion, Yuki, one thing that I wanted to make sure that we spoke to was the financial, the economic side of this conversation. Do you know anything about pay being withheld? What happened to the artists who were supposed to be involved with Stimmung? What has that part of the conversation looked like?
It didn't happen for the Simone, but I don't know how specific actually we should say, just for the protective privacy of actually this person who's dealing. But for
Sure.
example, my so I was supposed to do projection design for Central Park 5, but for example, when they actually say that they're doing the most favored nation for all designers, which is on its own needs to be a conversation, but that's what they said. But for example, for me, they do offer less than the lighting designer, that kind of a thing. If that happens, for me, I actually didn't, and the conversation kind of stopped there. So I didn't get to continue that, but there is actually one particular designer who is actually trying to get the fee because she actually had fulfilled what her contract was said, but still she went to the HR, but actually HR person sent her back because it seems like a contractual conversation, so you need to directly talk to the company people, which that's where I wish there's a little more clarity on the HR support. These sort of conversation of these sort of harm or feeling of harm is happening to all people. When you say that, when company says that, it's that difference between equity and equality, saying that everybody is equally being harmed, but that on its own means that statistically speaking, BIPOC people are more prone to receive that heart in a greater ripple or wave. That conversation is not there. And then even with the pay, for example, like one of the things that I had been pushing was that when they ask, because this company, when they ask something, like they were like, well, we need to involve these people, but when they bring those people in, they don't talk about the fee. But this is not only our dream and passion, but also our living. So when we are not talking about financial security, that's not safe. That is not safe for any of us. So that is part of the safety, or I consider that as part of the safety. And that is one of the sort of the habit. And then when it comes to actually, one thing that I want to jump on to what Derrell was saying about tokenism is that inclusion part. Without the constant inclusion of these BIPOC in terms of the structural conversation, that inclusion part is the key part. And then, for example, just CCing him on the email, think that wouldn't cost anything, just like one button click situation, when that is not being practiced normally, that is where I think it shows where the exclusion is happening. And then you just are being that front face or shield or approval stamp, like depending on what it is, that way, but no agency to actually be part of the conversation.
If I can just,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say it's important that I think we acknowledge that this person that Yuki is referring to is a Black woman, and there's verifiable documentation where the company, confirms that she is due this money. They even said they were going to send her the money, but there was some error in their payroll system that precluded them from sending it, and so she would get it in the next payroll. And in the interim of that, she found out about all this stuff and decided to resign, and so now they're withholding the money from her. And so if Long Beach Opera is watching this, you need to pay her. That's a problem, like a huge problem, almost more paramount than a lot of the
Right.
nuanced conversations we're having here. Like, it is a huge problem, and she needs to be paid.
So with all of the layers of issues we're talking about, the financial issues, the tokenization, the mistreatment, it's really serendipitous, Derrell, that Central Park 5 is coming up, and from what it looks like, it's happening, and it's happening with Black folks involved. What does this mean for what you have called to the carpet? Is this the progress that you're hoping for, or is this something else?
That is a good question. I mean, I will be honest in saying that Central Park 5, how it is situated in all of this, is one of the most difficult spaces to navigate, because what's being done now, as I spoke to earlier, is folks are being pitted against each other in these marginalized spaces. I have like evidence that things are being said about me, trying to undermine what I'm getting at. Apparently, I'm like this orchestrator of all of these things because I have a grudge against a company for not getting a position that I wanted. And it's like, if only I had that kind of time, but like producing a movie, like onboarding at a new job, like, all of this other stuff. My big thing about the Central Park 5 is that I have done the show. I love the show. I'm a huge fan of Anthony Davis. I think the show deserves to be produced over and over and over. But when it comes to the context of how Blackness exists in this structure, and how white entitlement, white victimization is being used as a weapon against Black people, like it's almost like the inherent message, the inherent activism of the piece is undermined before it's even produced. And now what's happening is there are folks who literally are depending on this contract for the money. They're being leveraged as folks who want to do the show, but what wants to do the show means is that they want the money. But if they had it up, if it were up to them, like if you would give them the money, but then also do your own work and not involve them in this jungle of problem solving that they are, inevitably going to be asked to take part in, they would of course choose that option. And this is, for me, one of the most deplorable tactics being taken by the company, because they know that folks like me, and I'm sure I speak for Yuki and Alexander and others, I'm not going to publicly disparage Black people, and they know that. And so they're using that as their wild card. They're using that. They're positioning these people and to put them in positions where, in order for me to speak out against the production or speak out against the prospect of the production being seen through its execution, I would necessarily need to speak out against folks who are involved in that production, and some of whom are depending on those fees.
What can you offer concerning some of the conversations that I'm sure you've had with folks coming in this new production? Again, for their safety, we don't have to say names or anything, but what have those conversations looked like? Can people in this cast for Central Park 5 safely stand in solidarity with you?
No, they can't. And that's the thing. A lot of them are afraid. Not, there's the financial aspect, where, as Yuki has spoken beautifully to, there is a compounded disparity in terms of how fees, how financial, the implications of financial pressures affect marginalized people versus those in privileged spaces. And so there's that aspect, but there's also the aspect of, a lot of us in this industry who are come from marginalized identities are fighting to stay relevant, are fighting to get to a place where we're performing at the top companies, where we are in these networks that a lot of our white colleagues or male colleagues naturally have access to. And so it's hard to make a compelling case for anyone to potentially mess that up, for anyone to potentially create a situation whereby these powerful people, you know, James Darrell, that's a powerful name. Jenny Rivera, that's a powerful name in the industry, for these people to disparage them because of choices that they've made that they feel are injustice. And so I have spoken with a lot of these folks, and I know what the vibes are. I'm even reluctant to share what some of those are because they're so consistent across the cast. And yet, you know, what I'm getting back from other folks, some of whom are Black people, is that, well, the cast wants to do this, or the cast has said this, or the cast has said that. I was just like, well, you know, you can only fool me so far when some of these are literal friends of mine, and you know, I can text them easily to confirm or deny something that's being said, and so, you know, this was not meant to be one of my things, but I guess if I could speak directly to LBO colleagues again, I would say, you know, even beyond whatever we're trying to sort out, if we end up coming back to the table in conversation, or there's some learning that we all get out of this really difficult situation, I would just offer that there are legitimately innocent folks being dragged through your learning right now. This has nothing to do with anything they need to learn. This has to do with you trying to get out of a situation that you have created for yourself. And I would just encourage, out of love, really out of love, compassion, mercy for those folks who already face so much in this industry that is rooted in such detestable white supremacist values, that if there's anything you can do, it is to create space, to create safety, to ensure that the same way we don't want these folks to have their reputations tarnished and this, you know, more white supremacist culture of the opera industry, we also don't want to open them up to potential scrutiny by those justice seekers in the industry who might look on someone participating in a production where other BIPOC folks are protesting, you know, because they need the money.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Jamie, as I invite you and pass the baton to you for the second half of this, I want to, you know, leave you with this as I leave. I wonder if you can speak to, as Derrell was speaking to, their Black people being used as leverage, people of color being used as leverage, the role of Black Opera Alliance, Asian Opera Alliance in these conversations when it comes to unifying us so that none of us can be used as that leverage against each other. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Garrett, for just really facilitating a deep dive right into this conversation, because, you know, to some of the points that Yuki has brought forth, the some of the isolation that happens is permitted to take place because the platforms don't typically exist for the individual who has been harmed in these situations, right? So you just kind of, the one with the loudest voice gets to tell the story, and then everyone else has to fade into the background. And so we thank Garrett for facilitating this space to where you all can speak directly to your specific experiences. And so now this is an opportunity to engage in some Q&A and just really talk about what comes next. So one of the questions that came up actually as we were talking about the report that came out, Kevin Nicholson said, how can we be sure that Long Beach Opera's investigation findings present the full truth and not just what's convenient for their image? So Derrell, you spoke to this just a little bit by saying that the summary was not the investigator's summary, but it was the opera company's summarizing of the 21 pages. So, you know, to me, this speaks to just, again, what I mentioned about who gets to tell the story. And so I want to, as we're looking at how we go forward, what do you all say, you know, as three people who have boldly decided to tell your stories? You know, what do you say for those of us who are out here who are either directly experiencing certain some of these things or are observing these things, what do you say about who gets to tell the story, who gets to narrate, how these things go? And this is open to anyone.
I have to say that when I saw the LBO summary, and that this thing about the board had, quote, promised to be transparent. Our relationship with LBO in the wake of this, in this discussion up till now, I would not say was characterized by transparency. I think, sort of radical transparency and honesty was kind of the only weapon that we had in terms of, asserting that we were safe to do this work while also speaking out against the company. In turn, we've been met with, assurances that communication would happen a certain way, production support would happen a certain way, and that the mediation, because there's no communication happening, the way that mediation would be guiding us through this was going to happen in this very specifically structured way in which we'd also have a seat at the table in determining what happened next and how to move forward. None of that happened. And there was no accountability. And I feel like, we have been sort of suckered before. So the raw truth is that when I see this distillation, we were also told that we would receive the investigator's summary at the same time as the company, not that which we never received, not that the company's investigation would go to the press before it went to us. So, it's impossible to know. There's not enough information. Again, like Derrell's saying, with the legal qualifications of racial tokenism, all I know is I know it when I see it. There's a strong ethical sensibility that I have about Black people being billboarded as being in power and then not actually having it. And I will absolutely not be a part of it. And I'm going to tell people that that is what's happening. And you can choose to believe me or not choose to believe me. And you just have to go. You just have to go on trust. It reminds me of my dad being in Painesville as a Jamaican in the late 1960s. And he would say, if you saw a Black person standing outside of a bar, he'd be like, how is it in there? Like, just when, and he's like, it's all right. Okay, we're good to go inside. Take it or leave it.
I mean, I feel like that's pretty telling, right? And within the organization, within the group, we're discussing our own next steps, right? In our work, we have the pledges, and Garrett and I went live yesterday to explain why Long Beach Opera went from being a green card company to a red card company, which ushers us into this next stage as we deal with the pledges, because we know that there's only so much, right, that is quantifiable that we can kind of check off, right? And what we're seeing is that many of the organizations are taking on that work, those things that we can see, those things that we can say, those things that we can point to. And what I heard you say, Alex, is that also there are those things that we might not be able to put a finger on, but we know it, like you said, when we see it. And that those things, right, that we may not be able to provide evidence for are just as real, right? And as a community, I'm noting that we're starting to trust those feelings and to share those feelings. So this conversation, again, you are here. You have shared what got you here. Each of you, I would love for you to share what you hope to see come, your ideal responses, or what you say is the next best step or the next best thing to come of this situation.
I can start. I have thought about this a lot, and I think, for me, there's no perfect next step, next set of events, because the main test for me was what the response would be to all of this. Months ago, I will admit, maybe embarrassingly so, that I had this optimistic belief that there would be a period where we submit the resignation letter, but we're staying on the shows, and it's uncomfortable at first, but after a while, it's just like, hey, yeah, that's Derrell. Like, I know him. I know that he's full of love. I know that he just wants to see justice come to be. And that's Alexander. We love Alexander. And that's Yuki, talented, full of love, full of light. These are people who are just trying to be change makers. And they would come back to the table, and we would, whether it was through discomfort or not, sort of really tackle these issues head on in a way that we could not do as employees of the company because of the tokenization, because of the stripping of power. But like, if I'm separate from the company, now you can hear me and my expertise and my human experience. And that didn't happen. And unfortunately, with this investigation, the way they're framing it, where is the love, where is the justice? If there's this idea in there where these are these folks' experiences, and those experiences, those feelings are real. If they're real, why have, where's the apology? Where are the specific steps forward? One of the first things I would tell people when a lot of this was coming out is that if I were a general director of a company and folks were to lodge these sorts of grievances, and not 1, 2, 3 folks, and I want to clarify again for everyone, this is us plus, 10 and now over a dozen after the fact, other people, most of whom are women, about half of whom are people of color, all with similar types of complaints. If I were to hear all of that, I cannot imagine any different first step than to say, wow, I am so sorry you experienced that at my company. Let's sit down and figure out some solutions. And that's just not what has happened. We have seen tactics. We've seen the manipulation of optics. We've seen attempts to discard Derrell, discard Alexander, and replace them with new Black people whom we can leverage in typical white supremacist fashion, because we need the Blackness, we need the BIPOC space, the BIPOC legitimacy in order to be used as currency, in order to be the woke white folks, the woke young white producers, leaders in opera that we claim to be. We need that to defend ourselves, as you spoke to earlier, Jamie. And it's just such an unfortunate, I feel like for a lot of folks in the industry, this was one of the companies that was potentially doing it right, or at least on the path to doing it right. And to see them turn to the same tactics, even when they had months of ability, months of channels to take a step back and say, actually, we're not doing as well as we thought. Let's figure it out together. And they chose not to do that.
Yeah. Alex, Yuki?
Yeah, for me, I'm not necessarily, I think it's more towards, I think that sort of everybody, I'm asking more for everybody rather than the Long Beach, is that I like, intention was never to burn it down or destroy or anything like that. It really, actually, this whole situation actually brings me back to one specific incident that happened, like sort of earlier when I started working there. Was that in one of the dress rehearsal, or one of the rehearsal of the show, Black singer, he had a microphone on, but the tape, the skin tone was not his skin tone. It was more beige, not his skin tone. So Derrell actually made a comment on Slack saying that, hey, can we just make sure that we have the clear ones, or different color that matches his skin tone. Like he just brought that up. And then the response actually from the general director was, well, I'm sure that happened only because that was just a rehearsal. And then sort of more response was more aggressive, that I kind of, and so wish that it was more so of, hey, whether it was your intention or not, and then whether this person is like prepared for the show or not, this Black singer already experienced that sort of, might not be discomfort level, but that wonder of that skin tone like thought.
Mhm.
And that already happened. So us actually bringing that up is not trying to label the company as racist or this people that's not the point. We are actually saying that this person, we were not considering about this person's skin tone, and we should. And then this is the whole intention of all of this is that these people resigned not to tear the company down. These people resigned because these people were being harmed, and then it was not stopping. So it's a action that came out of care, not anger. So I think that is an important. I think as a collective, when we speak up, our interest is not to label the company racist or cancel them or anything like that, or cancel even the show. We are actually trying to be more inclusive. We want the company and the industry that we want our dream to happen. It's our workplace, it's our passion. That to be more for all of us. And that's something that this conversation gets used in, for example, oh, this is why like diversity is too hard, or it's too dangerous, all they want to do is tear it down. That's not the intention. And I think that's something that I don't want to get lost in this sort of heated conversations. So yeah, that's kind of more of not the next step, but in general future, when we all speak up, we are speaking out not to label people as racist. Their experience that's valid, that we was there and we felt. So we are saying,
Yeah. And I think for me, we're in a time where not just in opera and not just in the arts, but, as a mass movement, I think in the 2020s in America, values have become sort of the marketable currency of companies. Like it's, almost of the age where we're falling away from individualism, and we all are stating that we want to do the right thing. Even if the right thing, it could be different to different people, right? It might be, this cancel culture thing is wrong, but then there's also, there's a moral passion behind that as well. And I think that the companies signaling that equity, diversity, inclusion, that they're sort of trailblazers in that space. And I think the biggest tragedy of it is that we really could have been, if we were willing to say how extremely hard it was and how we were failing at it. I feel like if we had the emotion, if everyone had the emotional bandwidth to just say, we're struggling at this and this is not right, and we're trying to reinvent the wheel here, and we just let it air out, I think I don't know. I really do think that we could have broken some new ground. And I think the challenges with all of this stuff is that, because you said a racist thing unconsciously, you're not a racist. Like, nobody's immune from racism, and nobody's immune from misogyny. These things are in our DNA and in the structures of what we're doing. So if we're saying that what we're doing is tackling that, the amount of bandwidth that we need to have to process that difficulty, I just don't. I think either that's the work, or say we're not going to change it, and then we're not going to promote that way. You know, like I'm happy to do work for a company. I have to work for companies where equity is not foregrounded in the things that we're doing. That's fine, but we're not trying to lacquer on a vision that that's what's happening. I think actually that type of tokenism is the worst possible outcome that we could have had after the summer of 2020. The idea that it's like, wow, structural racism exists. Let's create a billboard of what it would look like for it to work, but keep it basically the same on the inside. I think then we're actually taking a step backwards. So I just hope that there can be some acknowledgement that we're not crazy, and that the things that we're talking about are a huge problem, and that the ubiquity of these problems, like, oh, well, that's what's happening everywhere, does not make it any less reprehensible or egregious that this is where we're going right now. And, you know, and that people have been harmed at the company, that like, this is what happens. These particular people of color wanted to leave that space because it didn't feel safe as a message. But it doesn't mean we're closing off a conversation. And it's just been extremely difficult to have that kind of clarity and openness when I think there's just been so much, you know, paralyzed fear of being called a racist, being called misogynistic. And it's a shame, because it's just, these are problems that we have to work to clarify, you know, our principles together, you know, versus just trying to run to the finish line of we've got this all figured out. And I don't think anybody has right now.
Yeah, thank you all for speaking to that. And, you know, I want to share that this by no means can be an all-encompassing conversation, right? Because these issues are centuries old, and our intention was to focus specifically on what happened in this instance to provide not only the platform for you all to share what has happened, but to provide a demonstration of what the work looks like. And we will be continuing this conversation in a zoomed out kind of a way on April 19th. We will be partnering with one of our sibling organizations, Asian Opera Alliance, in doing this work. And we've got the call out to some more of our partners in this equity work so that we can zoom out, because while this happened at Long Beach Opera, when we shared the letter, there was a comment in the chat that said this resignation letter could have been written to so many other companies, right? So we are going to have these conversations about what it looks like to inflict microaggressions on people that you have invited into the space. And we're going to look at what it looks like when the space is not created with diversity and inclusion in mind, right? You know, to your point, Yuki, we're not intending, and so many of us are not intending to go into these conversations to quote unquote burn it down. But when we're talking about systemic change, there is some destruction that must take place. And so we are going to talk about those areas that need to be destroyed, in essence, right? And we're talking about structures, not people, because what I've heard you all say is that when the structure prioritizes itself, protecting itself through defensiveness and you know, redirecting, that people often end up as the casualties, right? And so to Yuki's point and to all of our point, this conversation is led by care and love, and that care and love can be destructive sometimes. But I just wanted to put that out there that we will be continuing this conversation. We've got 2 more questions that I'd love to.
Can I just throw in a speak, Jamie? I just need to throw that in there.
Listen, you know I love a good testify, okay? You can always throw that out there. Just come on off mute when you need to let a sister know she said some things, okay? But we've got a couple questions that I'd love to get to, and then we'll come around to wrapping it up. So Catherine Washington offered, I may have missed this explanation as I tuned in late. This question is for Derrell and Alexander. I'm curious as to why the decision to move forward with productions involving BIPOC artists was made given the knowledge of these internal issues. If there was a lack of safety for you holding positions of power as artistic director, minister of culture, respectively, why invite more marginalized bodies into a space where it's impossible to provide safety?
I think that's a really fantastic question. And I'm going to preface what I'm going to say is by, with it's not going to be sufficient, because if it were sufficient, then, we would have gotten out on the other side of this without the feeling of harm having been perpetuated. But what I will say is that the folks who had been contracted, cast in these shows, that had already happened. That work had already happened before we resigned. And, just knowing how financial situations work in this industry, knowing that because we have been so intentional about bringing in BIPOC folks into these positions, that they would be disproportionately affected if we were to all of a sudden decide as a trio or as a duo or as a whatever it may be, that, this space is unsafe for all BIPOC people. Therefore, nobody, it can work here right now. First of all, I don't think we would have had that power. I think we would have tried to say that, and they would have said, well, okay, bye-bye to you, but we're still going to do our productions, so we're a company and we need to make this money. And secondly, we did feel, because of that, the first thing I just said, that if these productions were going to happen anyway, if the company and the board were to agree that we could stay on, I'm the creative producer of Quando, and I must say, I feel that show, the integrity of the values of that show have been protected, partly because it's a co-production and because LBO decided not to be very involved and support it. And so the other company that was co-producing did a really good job of making that happen. But also, if we could be there and be empowered to be the folks to ensure that there was a channel between what was happening in our spaces of production and anything that may be trickling from these more administrative leadership spaces, then we felt at least moderately confident that we could act as that buffer. And then I will say, as someone who's in senior management, that so often that is the case. So often it is a Black or Asian or Hispanic board member that's vetoing something or that's stopping something, or, some Black person in directorship at a company that's saying, no, you can't say that to her, or no, you can't offer that fee to that person when you're offering this to this other, so there is something to be said about the dynamics of the structures of these institutions, and that we know, I, as someone who am also a performer, know that as performers, we tend to experience the harm, experience the implications of these super problematic systems at a lesser extent than those folks who are closer to the sources of the actual problematic activity. But with all of that said, I want to also hold us accountable and saying that, I think there is some mismeasuring that happened, some mismanagement that happened. And as I said before, my optimism in some ways got the best of me, and that I thought the discomfort, the white fragility, as it were, would be momentary. And because I do know these people, especially Jenny, to be a very smart person, I was hopeful that after that discomfort would come some really potentially transformative activity around an authentic inclusion, an authentic equity, an authentic protection of marginalized people.
Well, I mean, especially since, they had taken these steps that had given the appearance of being open right? And so what we know, Derrell, you and I working in this space, is what we know is that the defensiveness, the sense of shame, the fragility, the rage, all of these things, all of these symptoms come up, right? When you hit the spot, right? And also it's possible to work through and to work past those things,
Right.
especially when the willingness is there. So it sounds like it all demonstrations had presented that the willingness was there, even if the frailties or the challenges were going to be met. And it sounds like you all were ready to deal with that, but it was the unwillingness that was kind of the shock in all of it.
Yeah.
Alex, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I mean, yes, in that I think this has been a learning experience, to say the least. I mean, I think last summer I started to see where we were and see that we had this issue of this cross connection of, we've got these 5 personalities here who are all interested in these different things, artistically, ethically, socially, a lot of fire. Somebody asked me, how's it going at Long Beach Opera? And I said, man, we're either going to take over the world, or is this going to erupt spectacularly? And unfortunately, it was the latter. And I think that's when I started signaling, I think we're not clear on our values here. I think, I think we each have our personal individual values, but when we are even signaling that what we're trying to do is collaborate with a person like Derrell, a person like James, Darrell, that just even take those two, that people who could be coming from such different spaces, such different lived experiences. Now the idea and the proposal of that was super exciting to me, but that would be so much work to really refine. Well, then what are the values? Like, what's the most important thing for us to focus on as we move forward in this work? What's the next most important thing? And I just don't think you can do it. I mean, I will tell you that this whole experience, in terms of me working for a company again, I will look much more closely at those foundational documents and what the stated mission and purposes of the company. I don't think this is something that you can take lightly anymore, especially in the opera space, because this work of, the only thing that is worse than, I think, not trying to decolonize this space is to partially do it in a way that leaves you exposed, where somebody's like, okay, well, you can bring people of color in mass, and it's like, great. And in the back of your head, it's like, wait a second, this is not safe. How is this going to? Can we put these things in place? Can we, and yeah, I think it's been a pretty harrowing lesson learned the hard way in that sense.
Right.
Yeah.
I think sorry, I know that question was not asked to me, but one thing that I would say was that it was that danger of putting diversity first and before equity. And there was actually, even in the media conversation, we have tried to put that equity part in forward. And then I think it's the matter of commitment. That is something that I think we misestimated in a way, but also we really hoped that that was not the truth of that commitment really coming forward, especially after these 3 people resigned. That's a big gesture. And then I was a little bit surprised that was taken more so casually. One thing that I did say, keep saying, was that for me, for Long Beach to say they're taking it seriously because they're doing the investigation, that didn't mean anything to me, because 3 people resigned. And also the word harassment was particular word I used for my part, which was a month before that happened, that actually caused legal sort of action that needs to happen. And that seems but that is separate than what are they going to do next. So that's kind of where we hope by us taking action or them taking action, there will be the change. And then, yeah, so I think that's where the difficulty came in. Yeah.
And if I can also add, Jamie, sorry, I'll be very quick because if I'm not mistaken, the person who asked that question was a member of the cast of
Yep.
Shimung.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have not personally had. Oh, exactly. Okay. Hi, Casper. Thank you. I was just about to speak to this. I just want to say, you know, you and I have not had interactions, but I want to apologize, you know, that actions, decisions that I made, you know, by implication, by ripple effect, have affected you and other people in the cast. And I think, you know, there's no blueprint for how to do this. And I hope that we can all be comforted at least a little bit in knowing that it all has come, you know, anybody who knows me, know, like top of the list is my love for Black people, and then you got justice, and then you got, you know, a bunch of other stuff, and so that's the part I'm always sure about, and so that even if there are missteps or and miscalculation of how something is going to land or how something is what the results are going to be, there's always a driving force of a justice, the liberation of my people, you know, and so there's that for whatever it's worth. But I do apologize to anybody, you know, the Shimon people and also the people in Central Park 5 now, you know, there may be Kwando people from my show who are watching this and who feel a sense of ambivalence or a sense of confusion. And, you know, it's unfortunate, but I do think, as Jamie, you've spoken to, there is a necessity of chaos, of destruction somewhere in this. Otherwise, the system will always recalibrate and run over all of us. We are not more powerful than the system. And so I personally believe, as an activist, that the only way to have any shot at potentially changing its course is by disrupting. And that's what we have sought and what we continue to seek to do.
Yeah, I'd like to throw in just on top of that, you know, my apology to the cast and the team of Stimmung. The emotional investment in that project was significant. And I think we got partway to making that a safe space, and that made people extremely invested in the work that was happening. And so that was a pretty extraordinarily difficult decision to pull from that project. And I know that that's, you know, I'll be critiquing how I could have done this better for the rest of my life. And I hope that we can, like, at least, you know, agree that the arrow is pointing in the right direction.
And Casper, thank you for participating. And also wanted to say to the viewer too that they were the person who invested in terms of the structural safe space that this rehearsal of Shimon can happen the most. They have brought in their profession to actually talk and being able to actually even even be in the rehearsal, be part of it, the sense of belonging, and even systematic part of the feedback portal and such. They were the one that actually also participated along with them. Actually, all Steamon cast have worked really hard actually to make this happen. This actually makes me really sad. So
it's I'm feeling the spirit of Garrett McQueen. You know, Garrett is always here with the quote. And as you all are speaking, I'm hearing, you know, how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I fear I have led my people into a burning building." You know, when he was speaking of the work that he did towards integration, right? Because the ideal, right? What we think is possible, what we hope is possible, what we are told is possible, sometimes we don't see what we're actually dealing with until we get inside. And sometimes it's too late, and some of us get burned.
Yeah.
And the scars are there. And it is, to Yuki's point, it is sad, it is unfair. And it is an aspect of this work. And so and just there are just certain, Derrell, you demonstrated actually what I was going to ask as we were talking about the next steps, and not even ask, but to bring forth, because you also said earlier, where is the apology, right? And then as a cast member who has been affected by all of this came forth, you offered that apology, even when it's not all your fault, right? You're not evil, you're not bad, you're not wicked. You made choices, you made decisions, and people were impacted. And because of that impact, you apologized. And what I've heard communicated through this conversation tonight is that there has not been that level of acknowledgement of the impact of the decisions that have been made along the way by this company, because of a defensiveness, because of a protectiveness as a response. People have been left without even the basic acknowledgement of what they have been put through because of it. And so I feel like what we're saying is that it's not just the clear values, though it is essential. It is, what is the commitment to those values? Are we committed? Are we willing to have the uncomfortable conversations? Are we willing to sit in that discomfort? Are we willing to fail? Are we willing to be wrong? Are we willing to be bad at it? All in service of the systemic change that all of our signatories have declared, and even those who have not signed the pledge, still holding DEI statements on their websites. This is what we're saying that we're ready for. And what I'm hearing in this conversation is that it's not just the painting, right? It's not just the painting on, it's not the veneer. In fact, if you were to go into a home that is culturally, that is structurally unsound, but has patched up all of the visible holes and painted the outside, that becomes even more dangerous because it has the appearance of safety. And to Alex's point earlier, we're used to being in unsafe spaces, right? People of color, women, this country has been that. We're used to it. But when we're at home, or when we are amongst friends, people who express care, concern, commitment to us, we move different.
Yep.
There is we let down our guard, we open our hearts, and that becomes the biggest violation, because now we experience this assault unprotected. And so, to me, what I hear is that the next best step for Long Beach Opera to take, should they desire to take it, would be an honest acknowledgement and apology of every instance that was brought forth, rather than trying to hide behind a summary that says, well, we don't have any racism, we don't have any misogyny, and while these women and people of color felt this way, we don't have it. I think this is a great question, final question for us to leave off from, and it comes from Andrea Joy Pearson. What can we as a community do to support each of you now that all of this has come to light, knowing that we believe you and affirm you. We don't need no receipts. We don't need no proof. We believe you and affirm you. So how can we as a community support each of you now? What can we do?
Well, I think for me, it definitely it starts with that. Like, I'm like, man, I'm sorry, James. I just have to go back to something you just said because it's so important to highlight this idea that I have become, and I'm sure as have so many of us, exceedingly proficient at navigating white spaces, at figuring out how to be strategic in how I make moves and how I continue to, climb ladders. But what's destructive to my personhood, to my journey, my heart, my soul, is when there is a mischaracterization of what's being offered. And that is what my grievance is, right? And I said this over and over before Yuki came to the picture, before Alexander came to the picture, before so many other people came into the picture at that company, that if equity and inclusion is not what you're offering, that's okay. Let me know. Those happen to be my values. And I will gracefully step away and not speak against a company. I don't think everyone has to have the same set of values. But when you feign them as your values and invite me in as someone who's so passionately, unapologetically, necessarily, inevitably attached to them, and use my resources, use my heart, use my care,
Your access.
and my access, in a way that turns out to be a bastardization of the core of those things, then it's painful. And I'm a strong dude. But anyway, to Andrea's deliciously supportive, beautiful question, I really think, I forget the full quotation, but I think it's Malcolm X who said, if you're not careful, you'll have the people, the oppressor, you'll have yourself believing the oppressors and speaking out against the people being oppressed, something like that. And I think that's what I would say to all of us. I think, whether it's Long Beach Opera or some other system structure, the go-to in these situations when folks hold these structures to the fire is for them to turn us against ourselves. We've seen it historically, whether it's the poor white people that were turned against the black people, whether it's the Asian folks who are turned against the black people, or vice versa, whether it's the people come from different countries who are turned against the poor people in America. We see it over and over and over. A nuanced conversation in all of this that I would love to have at some point is the fact that even Jenny herself, as a female general director, I've seen a disparity in how she has been treated and held to the fire by the board versus if what I've seen of other general directors who are men, but we're not even at a place where we can have that conversation because the initial acknowledgement of the harm hasn't even happened. You know what I mean? And so I would just say to people in my community as Black folks, or, whatever it may be, the BIPOC community, the gay community, the administrative community, the singer community, just really know the facts. And I think the same grace, the same compassion, the same love that we have taught ourselves to show to those folks who are coming out and are courageous enough to report abuse, to report assault. I think we need some of that in these spaces for folks as they gather the courage to speak out against these systems that none of us really have the right answers on how to truly dismantle, but we know when we're being harmed. And if we start, as Andrea has done, with "I believe you," because I know that it exists in such ubiquity, and let's hold hands as we figure out the next steps. That's really that's the vibe. I'm going to be okay relative to so many of my colleagues, and so I don't, my request is not to to hold Derrell in a place that is somehow, you know, piteous or anything like that. Like as I said, I become exceedingly proficient at it, and I happen to have positions in this industry where I can.
Well, I'm gonna pause you.
Yeah, please.
I'm gonna pause you because here's the thing, right? We know how to navigate the spaces because we put on armor,
Mm-hmm.
right? And here's the thing, I prior service military, right? And I served a tour during war, right? And it is not healthy to be armored and to be wearing your Kevlar all day, every day, right? And when you take it off, the relief is still there. No matter how used to carrying it you are, it is still a foreign weight that you are being made to carry. And we are in a time where we are saying that we deserve to be safe in our creative spaces and to not have to wear armor in these spaces, right? And so, Derrell, I hear what you're saying, right? Listen, I ain't no punk. I ain't weak. Like, like I can. And the fact that we are all in opera, each and every one of us in this call and those in the chat, the fact that we are here demonstrates that strength, that tenacity, that endurance, that capability. And also, we are all authorized, our humanity. We are all permitted to say, that hurt. It hurt me that this company that I felt safe at is now mischaracterizing me and my intentions intentionally, because these people know me, right? It is the most human response to say ouch when we are attacked, when we are hurt. It is the most human response to say, I require nurturing and care and support. And so while Derrell, Alex, Yuki, I have no doubt, y'all are good. Y'all been surviving, right? Y'all been doing this and y'all are on the other side, right? And also what our sister Andrea Joy and the chat is extending to you is we are saying that we see you, we honor the work you're doing, and we acknowledge what it has cost you and is yet costing you. So, Derrell, I invite you to realize that for you to receive that acknowledgement does not take away from anybody else that we extend that to, and that you are not only worthy of it, but you are due that acknowledgement and that care, each and every one of you.
Received. Thank you.
Go ahead and take it, okay? You know, Alex, Yuki, did you have a specific request for or response to that question that Andrea Joy put forth?
It's not a, well, maybe it is a request, but it's more so of, I actually, it's not a request, I guess. I actually appreciate the fact that, you know, this is a platform of Black Opera Alliance, like, but it's with the collaboration of Asian Opera Alliance. And even when I sort of first talked with Black Opera Alliance folks, you all took time to hear my story. Like majority of meeting was end up you actually listening to my story of it, and then that helped a lot mentally. I think that when anybody else is, it seems like such a taboo topic to talk about when other people, when you are experiencing that harm, because then you might be dragging in people to this sort of mess, that kind of a thing. But I think for those who can offer that space to listen, that helps a lot. So I think, first of all, thank you, Black Opera Alliance, for actually listening, and also Asian Opera Alliance too, and even actually doing this joint um, collaboration as well, because otherwise, I think all of this would have just disappeared and went nowhere.
Thank you, Yuki.
I think for me, the most tragic thing is the loss of the idea of what it seemed like was going to happen, which was this notion of opera being this ineffable, incredible, sensorially astounding theatrical musical experience that could be tethered to, anchored by, rooted in principles and values that were really radically transformative and really moving towards like a deeper sense of humanity. And that was the excitement that I felt, and I know that a lot of people felt coming into Long Beach Opera. And and around, I don't know, even 4 months ago, people reached out to me from other companies like, hey, I hear that you're on the leadership team of Long Beach Opera. What can you share? We're trying to do the same thing at such and such unnamed company. What can you tell us? To sort of paraphrase Rudyard Kipling, to watch the things that you've spent your life working on destroyed and stoop and build them back up with worn out tools. Let's keep building. I think this idea that like 2020 was this diversity wave that we're kind of sick of now, and that we're done with this now. We have a whole bunch of people of color that have broken en masse into these institutions right now. It's happening in theater. It's happening everywhere in these arts institutions. And now we're dealing with the nitty gritty, the problems where the rubber hits the road. These are structures. It's not a show. These are structures that we're trying to change. And my request is to look at this failure and let's keep moving forward.
Thank y'all so much for that. And, let me see, I wanted to share this. Demaria said, thank you for the conversation, your transparency and desire to share your wisdom as we all try to figure this out is invaluable. Lessons are truly being learned, right? This is the work. And so I want to acknowledge each and every one of you for your willingness, your transparency, your honesty, speaking your truth, and being bold enough to declare it out loud, and being bold enough to trust another structure, right? To trust Black Opera Alliance, Asian Opera Alliance, to provide the platform to do our best to take care of you. Some things I heard as takeaways and things that we can provide going forward. This is an opportunity for us all, the organizations, even Long Beach Opera, to remember the declarations that we have made and to reorient, right? Because we've all been harmed by these systems. White folks too. We've all learned a way of being that is detrimental to the human heart sensitivity required to make the art that we all love. And we have all learned to protect ourselves. And also, we're seeing how the systems will rise up to have people pointing the weapons again inward at each other, at other people. And this is an opportunity to reorient on the declaration of the true intention. Systemic change. This is not us against them. This is not, this company is evil, these people are evil. This is us as people, as organizations, against harmful systems of white supremacist oppression. Against it where it shows up within each of us and within our organizations. This is the commitment. This is our opportunity that we're offering to remember that that is the thing that we are deconstructing right now, and to take this invitation to come back to that work. Even Long Beach Opera, there is opportunity for repair, because the goal, right, is, to Alex's point, is to be the thing that we say we are. That's the opportunity, and that opportunity still exists. I heard Derrell say that our way forward collectively is through community, being present with and for each other. Yuki offered, listen to each other and be heard. Listen and speak up. And Alex offered, keep building. We are on the right track. And all of these things that have shown up are symptoms of the healing that we are bringing. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And as I mentioned, we will continue this conversation, directing it more broadly at the opera industry as a whole. We will be joined by our sibling organization, Asian Opera Alliance, and we've got more invitations out. We will be having that conversation on April 19th, another Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until then, we invite you to visit our website and donate. You know, if you like it, say it with your chest and your dollars. Because guess what? This work we're doing, you know, Yuki spoke to it, right? To the fiscal, the financial harm. And also there's some fiscal activism, right? Because when the Black Opera Alliance gets money, we do things like offer grants to support our members. We do things like offering workshops to supplement the education and the development of our members, and to provide opportunities for our members. So go on ahead and visit and to do that. And we also invite you to follow us on all of our social media platforms as we continue to engage with this work. Some people call it cancel culture, and you can call it that if you want to, but just know what we're canceling, right? Our vision is much higher than individuals. Like Derrell said earlier, if only we had the time to be that petty. No, we are in the work of canceling oppression, and we wear it with honor. Thank y'all for joining us, and y'all have a good night.
Thanks,
Thank
Jamie.
you. Thank you.